My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm 69 years old, a widow, and I've lived my entire life in Portland, Oregon. After my husband passed 10 years ago, I tried to keep life steady. I worked part-time as a retired school librarian, surrounded by the scent of old books and childhood laughter echoing faintly in my memory. My two children, Ethan, 37, and Sophie, 35, were the center of my world. I raised them alone after their father's sudden heart attack. I sacrificed vacations, new clothes, and even my retirement plans to ensure they got the best education possible. But lately, I had begun to feel like a burden in my own family's story. Ethan had recently moved me into his big new house, promising to take care of me. At first, I believed him. The first few weeks felt like heaven. Home-cooked dinners, laughter around the dining table, even movie nights. But as days passed, small things started changing. My things were moved without asking. My chair in the living room was suddenly too old-fashioned. I overheard Ethan's wife, Laura, whispering, "She's slowing us down. We can't live like this forever." I pretended not to hear. I smiled through dinner, even as my heart ached. One chilly morning, as I struggled to make coffee, Ethan entered the kitchen looking frustrated. "Mum, we need to talk," he said sharply. His voice had that cold tone that I used to hear only when he was scolding his kids. "We can't keep doing this. You're not happy here. Maybe it's time we consider a senior home." I froze. I tried to explain that I could help with the kids, that I could cook, clean, anything to stay close to them. But before I could finish, he shouted, "If you won't go to a home, then get out of my house." His words sliced through me like glass. My coffee cup slipped from my trembling hands and shattered. In that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just quietly walked to my room, packed a small suitcase, and sat on the bed, staring at the wall, 40 years of motherhood, all reduced to this silence. I stepped out of Ethan's house with nothing but a handbag, my old coat, and a trembling sense of disbelief. The cold Portland wind bit into my cheeks as I began walking down the long suburban road. I didn't know where I was going. The world around me blurred. Every step echoed the words that kept replaying in my mind. "Get out of my house." I sat down on a bench near a small park. Children played in the distance, their laughter like cruel reminders of the past. My phone buzzed. It was Sophie. I hesitated, then answered. "Mum, what's wrong?" she asked instantly. I tried to sound strong, but my voice cracked. "Your brother asked me to leave." Silence filled the line. Then Sophie whispered, "I'm coming to get you." An hour later, I saw her car pull up. She hugged me tight, tears in her eyes. "You're not staying there another minute," she said. Sophie was always my gentle one, compassionate and kind. She lived in a small apartment downtown, barely making ends meet working as a nurse assistant. But her heart was pure gold. That night, she made me soup and tucked a blanket around me like I used to do for her. I felt safe again. But deep inside, something was breaking. I realized my son, the boy who once held my hand crossing the street, had pushed me away like a stranger. I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I stepped outside onto Sophie's small balcony and looked up at the stars. I whispered, "God, if you're listening, please show me what I'm supposed to do next." The next morning, as I sat sipping coffee with Sophie, there was a loud knock at the door. Sophie frowned, opening it cautiously, and there stood a man in a black suit. Behind him, parked on the street, was a long black limousine. "Mrs. Margaret Hayes?" he asked politely. My heart raced. "Yes?" He handed me an envelope, embossed with a golden seal. "This is from the Portland Literacy Foundation," he said. "Congratulations, ma'am. You've been selected for the Lifetime Community Educator Award, and there's a small grant included." My eyes widened. I had volunteered for years at the local library, teaching children from underprivileged backgrounds how to read. I never thought anyone noticed. Inside the envelope was a letter and a check for $100,000. Tears blurred my vision. Sophie was speechless. "Mom, this is real?" she whispered. The man smiled. "We've also arranged transportation to the ceremony. The limo's waiting whenever you're ready." I looked at the limousine again, gleaming, elegant, powerful. The irony hit me hard. Just an hour after being thrown out of my own son's house, the world had decided to open another door. That afternoon, I sat in that limousine, my wrinkled hands clutching the award letter. The driver offered me water and said, "Ma'am, people like you make this world better." I smiled weakly, still dazed. When we reached the city hall, cameras flashed and applause filled the air. I was led to the stage, where the mayor spoke about a woman who gave her life to nurture young minds. As I accepted the award, I couldn't stop my tears. Not because of pride, but because of the irony. My son had seen me as a burden. The world had seen me as a blessing. After the ceremony, several people approached me, offering me opportunities. One of them, a director of a local private school, asked if I'd like to join as a reading mentor for seniors and kids. I said yes. That night, Sophie and I went home, ordered pizza, and laughed for the first time in weeks. "Maybe," she said softly, "life needed to push you out of that house so it could pull you into something better." Weeks passed. My story was published in a local newspaper under the headline, "Widowed Mother, Rejected by Son, Honored by City." The response was overwhelming. Neighbors, old students, even strangers sent letters. Some shared their own stories of heartbreak and healing. Ethan called a few days later. His voice was shaky. "Mum, I saw the article. I don't know what to say." I stayed silent for a moment, then simply said, "Ethan, I forgive you. But sometimes, forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means letting go." He cried. I could hear the regret in his voice, but I'd already learned my lesson. Love must never chain itself to pain. I moved into a small cottage near the school, where I now spend my mornings reading stories to children and my evenings sipping tea under the golden sunset. Sometimes, the people who shut doors on you are unknowingly pushing you toward the doors meant for you. Don't let rejection define your worth. Sometimes the people who abandon you are just making space for life to reward you. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself slowly adjusting to a new rhythm of peace. My mornings began with laughter from children in the reading hall, and my evenings ended with soft music playing from the old radio in my cottage. Still, a shadow lingered inside me, the shadow of Ethan. One evening, after a long day of work, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Laura, my daughter-in-law. Her words were shaky and emotional. "Margaret, I owe you an apology. Ethan hasn't been the same since you left. The kids miss you, and he's been having trouble at work. Maybe we went too far." I read those words over and over, unsure whether to feel comforted or hurt again. That night, I sat by the window, holding the letter close to my chest. A mother's heart never truly stops caring. I thought of the nights Ethan had fever as a child, and how I used to sit by his bed, whispering prayers. How could the same boy grow into a man who pushed me away? I closed my eyes, whispering to myself, maybe guilt is his way of realizing love too late. The next morning, I received another call, this time from Sophie. "Mum, Ethan wants to meet you," she said softly. My heart skipped a beat. "What for?" I asked. "He says he wants to talk, in person." I hesitated. Pain still lived deep inside me, but something told me to go. Maybe closure was waiting, not reconciliation, but peace. It was a cloudy Saturday when I met Ethan at a quiet cafe by the riverside. He looked tired, older somehow. His eyes were red, as if sleep had been escaping him for days. "Mum," he said the moment he saw me, "I'm sorry." His voice cracked. I stayed silent, sipping my coffee slowly. He continued, "I thought I was protecting you. Laura kept saying you were unhappy, that the house was too crowded, and I let her words get into my head. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I listened. Every word felt heavy, but I couldn't ignore the sincerity in his tone. Ethan," I finally said, "you didn't just send me out of your house. You sent me out of your heart. That pain doesn't go away easily." He lowered his head. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want to make it right. Please come back home." I smiled faintly, tears threatening to fall. "Ethan, my home is not a place. It's peace, and I've found it here, in my little cottage, in my books, and in the children who listen to me read." He reached across the table, holding my hand. "Can I visit you then?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, you can visit me, but don't come as a guilty son. Come as the boy who once loved his mother." Ethan began visiting every weekend. At first, it was awkward. Conversations filled with pauses and memories neither of us knew how to handle. But gradually, things softened. He brought his children along, and the sight of them running in the garden outside my cottage filled the air with warmth again. Laura visited too, shy and quiet, often bringing fresh-baked cookies as peace offerings. One afternoon, Ethan asked if he could help at the literacy center. I was surprised, but I agreed. Watching him sit among children, helping them sound out words, brought tears to my eyes. It was as if the son I raised had returned, not through apologies, but through actions. One of the kids looked up and said, "Mr. Ethan, are you Mrs. Hayes's son?" He smiled proudly. "Yes, I am." That single moment healed something in both of us. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan turned to me and said, "Mom, I didn't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful you gave it anyway." I touched his face and whispered, "It wasn't forgiveness, Ethan. It was love. A mother's love doesn't expire. It just waits." Months passed, and life began to bloom again. My story had spread through local media, and one morning, a TV producer reached out to feature me in a documentary about everyday heroes. They wanted to showcase how I turned pain into purpose. I was hesitant at first, but Sophie encouraged me. "Mum, your story can help others who feel abandoned." During filming, they asked me what the hardest part of my journey was. I looked straight into the camera and said, "It wasn't being thrown out. It was realizing I had lost myself, trying to stay where I wasn't valued." The director wiped a tear from his eye. When the documentary aired, the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from mothers, grandmothers, and even adult children who said the story changed the way they viewed family. One letter stood out. It was from a woman who wrote, "Your story made me call my mother after 5 years. We cried together." That message alone made every tear I'd shed worthwhile. On my 70th birthday, Sophie and Ethan planned a small surprise party at my cottage. When I walked in, the house was decorated with fairy lights, and the children shouted, "Happy birthday, Grandma." For the first time in years, I felt complete. Ethan gave me a framed photo. It was a picture of our family, taken years ago, now restored and printed in color. Below it was engraved, "Home is where you are, Mom." Tears streamed down my face. Ethan hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you for never giving up on me." Sophie joined the hug, smiling through her own tears. I looked at both of them and said softly, "Sometimes love gets lost, but it always finds its way home." Later that night, as everyone left and the house grew quiet again, I stood by the window and looked at the moon. I thought of how pain had once felt like the end, but instead, it became the doorway to peace. I realized that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply allows the future to breathe. I turned off the lights, lay down in bed, and smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt free, not because my children had changed, but because I had found my strength again. And that, I knew, was the greatest gift life could ever give. A few weeks after my birthday, I found myself cleaning out an old drawer in my cottage. Beneath a pile of papers, I discovered a half-written letter. The paper had yellowed at the edges, the ink faint. It was addressed to Ethan, dated nearly a year ago, just after he had thrown me out. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The words on that page carried every ounce of the pain I had once felt. "I don't know what hurts more," I had written, "losing my home or realizing that my own son doesn't see me as family anymore." I had stopped writing halfway through, perhaps because the tears had made it impossible to continue. Reading those words again, I felt an ache deep inside. But it wasn't bitterness anymore. It was understanding. I realized that the woman who wrote that letter was lost and broken. But the woman standing now had found strength through forgiveness and purpose. I smiled softly, folded the letter again, and instead of mailing it, I placed it in the fireplace. The paper curled and turned to ash, and with it, I felt the last of my resentment burn away where that evening Ethan visited with his children. They ran into my arms, laughing, showing me their school drawings. I looked at them and thought, this is what healing looks like. Not dramatic apologies, not grand gestures, but small, honest moments where love quietly returns home. One morning, I received a call from the local community centre. They wanted me to lead a new initiative called Words for Hearts, a program where elderly volunteers would read and write stories with children who struggled emotionally or academically. It felt like life had come full circle. I accepted without hesitation. The first day, a shy boy named Caleb sat in the corner, refusing to speak. His teacher whispered that his parents were going through a divorce. I sat beside him, placed a book on the table, and said softly, "You don't have to read. Just listen." As I began reading aloud, I saw his expression change. His eyes softened, and by the end he whispered, "Can I try reading the next page?" That moment reminded me of why I had always loved teaching, not because of lessons, but because of connection. Over the weeks, Caleb became more confident. One afternoon, he gave me a handmade card that said, "You make me feel safe." My heart swelled. It felt like the love I had once lost had found new roots, in the laughter of children, in the power of stories, and in the realization that motherhood never ends. It simply changes its form. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes God takes away what you love most, only to return it in ways you never expected." Months later, a familiar face appeared at the literacy centre. It was Laura, my daughter-in-law. She looked nervous, but hopeful. "Margaret," she said, her voice trembling, "I've been volunteering at the women's shelter downtown. I thought maybe we could partner your reading program with them." I was surprised, but deeply touched. "That's a beautiful idea," I replied warmly. Over time, we began working together, and I started seeing a different side of her. She wasn't the same woman who once whispered that I was a burden. She had changed, softened. One day, after a long event, we sat on a park bench, watching the sunset. She turned to me with tears in her eyes and said, "I never told you this, but when you left, Ethan and I fought for weeks. I realized I'd let my insecurity become cruelty. You didn't deserve that." I reached out and held her hand. "We all make mistakes, Laura," I said gently. "What matters is that we learn from them." We sat in silence, watching the sky turn golden. For the first time, I truly felt like she was part of my family, not by obligation, but by choice. It was healing in its purest form, quiet, honest, and real. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan and Sophie invited me to a small event at the school auditorium. They said it was something special. When I arrived, the hall was filled with students, parents, and community members. The principal took the stage and announced, "Today we honor a woman whose compassion rebuilt families and inspired change in our city. Please welcome Mrs. Margaret Hayes." Applause thundered through the hall. I stood there, speechless, as Ethan and Sophie came forward, holding a large framed certificate. The city had officially named the literacy program after me, the Hayes Family Reading Initiative. Tears streamed down my face as the crowd stood in ovation. I looked at Ethan, and this time there was no pain, only pride. After the ceremony, he leaned close and said, "Mum, you didn't just forgive me, you taught me what love really means." I smiled and replied, "Love isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering who we are even when we're hurt." Sophie added, "You didn't lose a home that day, Mom. You built 1,000 new ones inside people's hearts." That evening, as I returned home, I placed the award beside my husband's old photograph and whispered, "We did it. Darling, they finally understand." The years moved gently after that. My health slowed me down a little, but my heart was fuller than ever. Every morning, I still walked to the community garden with my notebook, breathing in the scent of roses and damp earth. Sometimes Ethan joined me, sometimes Sophie, and other times I simply sat alone, watching the children play and the birds weave their nests in the trees. One evening, Ethan came by with his children. "Grandma," the little one asked, "why do you always smile when you look at the sunset?" I chuckled softly. "Because, sweetheart, it reminds me that endings can be beautiful too." Ethan looked at me, and I saw peace in his eyes, a peace we had both fought hard to find. After dinner, when everyone left, I sat in my armchair, opened my journal, and wrote my final entry. Once upon a time, I was told to leave a house, but in leaving that house, I found a home inside myself. Forgiveness didn't make me weak, it made me whole. As the last light of evening filtered through the window, I closed the book, feeling the warmth of gratitude in my chest. My life had come full circle, from loss to love, from betrayal to peace. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a mother abandoned. I felt like a woman reborn. Sometimes, being pushed out of one chapter is life's way of guiding you to your real story. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it rewrites your future.